Hey everybody, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Soulfood Books tonight. Give a little holler if you're alive and awake on a rainy old summer night. Tonight is for the hardcore that needed to come in and still find out what was in the stars to know what time astrologically to blow shit up tomorrow night. And to just gather as a community, once again, hanging out with our two friends. Let's welcome back Rick and Jeff to the stage.
Welcome back, Jeff.
Welcome back, Rick.
Welcome back, Julie. Thank you, Clint.
Thank you, Clint. Well, good evening. This is usually done the first Wednesday of every month because tomorrow is the 4th of July. We're a night early, so as Clint said, we'd like to thank you all for coming out.
Yes, and of course, our thanks always to Soulfood Books here in Redmond, Washington, where Jeff and I look at the stars and what's coming up for the month ahead on the first Wednesday night of every month except for this month. And there'll be people here tomorrow night lining up at the door.
Right.
Did I do that?
The 4th of July is tomorrow, not tonight. So, for those of you who are new to our astrology night, what we're going to do is first talk about the cosmic weather for the coming month, for the month of July. Right. And the cosmic weather basically is an astrological overview of the collective patterns. While each one of us has a unique and individual birth chart that is the primary tool for astrological forecasting, what we're able to do here is take the broad overview, because while you live in the world of your own experience, we also share the larger collective world, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah, and sometimes we talk about how on a rainy day, it sucks if you're going to the beach. You know, if you forget the suntan lotion, it would be nice to know in advance. But if you're a duck, today is the day. You know, because there's none of those damn humans running around making noises. You can get to do what you want. And so the weather is something we all share, but we react to it differently.
So what we're going to do is just get right into it and talk about what's going on for the month of July, what the planets are doing in the sky, and the kinds of effects we may experience here on Earth. And today is certainly a very busy astrological day.
It's rare, although we've done it before, that we actually meet for astrology night on a full moon or new moon. And today, I mean, can you see that full moon coming up over there? Well, no. It's cloudy and rainy out, and it's not dark yet. But, yeah, made you luck. No, but today is the day of a full moon. The full moon was actually just before noon here on the West Coast. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Good group, very good.
Better.
Well done.
All right. The full moon was just before noon here on the West Coast, and the full moon every month or every month, the full moon is the maximum fullness of our subconscious mind filled with the light of the sun and reflecting it outward. It's why people do howl or get crazy at the time of the full moon. We actually bleed more at a full moon. Doctors in operating rooms know this, because there's there's more energy, there's more movement, more fluidity, and it's almost like that which is normally quiet and tucked away, especially at a new moon, at a full moon can actually overflow right into our lives. And today we have a setup for a pretty good storm, and I don't mean the rain outside.
Yeah, absolutely. Every full moon is an opposition between the sun of consciousness and the moon of emotion and feeling. And in an opposition, we're really presented with the two extreme sides of a single story. This full moon is in Capricorn, meaning that the moon is in Capricorn, opposite the sun in the sign Cancer. And these are the two signs that have the most to do with security. Cancer represents the security we feel at home and inside of ourselves. Cancer, a water sign, is about feeling, family, and familiarity. Capricorn, on the other hand, is about the security we establish in the world by our discipline, through our career, through our accomplishments, and through our external recognized status. So the full moon in Capricorn every year represents the contrast between the Capricorn need to get tough, buckle down, be disciplined, take care of business, push past discomfort to advance our interests. That's opposite Cancer, which wants to curl up with a fuzzy blue blanket and return to the world of safety and familiarity. With every full moon, we have an opportunity to have a breakthrough in awareness. The breakthrough in awareness of this particular full moon is one that helps us recognize the full spectrum of safety, from inner comfort at one end to external recognition at the other. That's really the gift of this particular full moon. But the cautious conservatism of both Cancer and Capricorn.
Cautious for different reasons, but cautious nonetheless.
Right, right. Capricorn is the cautious mountain goat who wants to get up the mountain, who wants to achieve what it achieves without making mistakes, and Cancer basically wants to hold on to what it has. But I think there isn't a whole lot of holding on to what we have with this particular exceptional full moon.
Yeah, now for those of you who come here on a monthly basis, you know that we've been talking for a while about the ongoing square, that's a 90-degree angle between Uranus here at 8 degrees of Aries and Pluto here at 8 degrees of Capricorn. This is the social, cultural, economic, political, dynamic change that really began back, more than a year or so ago and will be with us for the next several years. This was exact for the first of 7 times about a week and a half ago on June 24th. And it's this dynamic aspect between revolutionary Uranus and evolutionary Pluto that this full moon is actually lined up with. Well, I have it almost lined up here, but we can back it up a bit. But it's this square between Pluto and Uranus that is aligned with the moon lining up with Pluto, with the sun opposite it, which is bringing out a great deal of intensity, a need for dynamic change, a need to confront those things in our lives that we've suppressed and we've kind of kept tucked away. Those things are spilling out or exploding out, and we need to process or deal with them.
Yeah, one of the fundamental patterns in astrology is when you have slow-moving planets like Uranus and Pluto, they really represent the deepest indicators of change. And yet it's when faster-moving bodies, like the sun and the moon, trigger them that their qualities tend to come to the surface. Pluto is a planet of death and rebirth or transformation. It's about addition by subtraction. So if Pluto is conjoined the full moon in Capricorn, it's about either intensifying our ambitions or being willing and able to purge something, someone, or some belief in our lives so that we can reach the level of success that we're aiming for. Similarly, Uranus making a right angle, called a square, an angle of challenge or stress, to both the sun and the moon, represents the sort of volcanic, earthquakey, shaky electrical energy that's going on below the surface. Now, these two outer planet transits, Uranus and Pluto, outer planets are about transformation. They're about madness. They're about breaking beyond the boundaries of the ego and that with which we are already familiar. So it's kind of interesting if we hold to too strongly a conservative position in terms of security, then we're more likely to suffer some serious surprises with this full moon. But for those of us and for those circumstances, or in those circumstances, where we're willing to go deep, Pluto, and we're willing to break patterns, Uranus, the whole framework of what will make us safe can open up, expand, and change into something very new and different.
Yeah, well said. And I think that one of the things that I picked up from what you just said that I'd like to take a step further is this idea that, well, Uranus is like lightning. When lightning strikes, it releases the tension that was built up. If there's no tension built up, the lightning strike is not going to be as strong. And you kind of said that we can either, go with it or be proactive, my words, my interpretation of what you were saying, or we can go in denial, in which case we're going to have to deal with more shock.
Right, and you're the one who says you can either be the lightning or get hit by the lightning.
That's
and
what I
think
was gonna
that's
say
very
next.
apt right now. Well, I've quoted you to you.
Well, good. And I don't mind that at all. And that's right. See, and it's not an all or nothing thing. Chances are there are things in our lives, there are areas, circumstances in our lives where we are willing to confront the unknown, where we're willing to dig into the tension and bring it out into the open to relieve the tension. And there are other areas in our lives where we just are happier stuffing it. And it's under this kind of a dynamic phase that those areas of our lives where we have chosen to stuff it, that the dynamic change might bring stuff out into the open anyhow. The lightning is going to strike. You can either be part of that lightning striking, or you can be the lightning rod receiving it.
Yeah, I think it's important as well to understand that almost nobody is going to be able to handle all of this gracefully, because Pluto, the mythological lord of the underworld, joined with the full moon, is likely to bring up issues that we have pushed down, as Rick talked about, that we've set aside. And the question isn't whether we can be cool in the midst of all of this or whether we can hold on to life as we know it. It is, how do you adapt and do you adjust when you face needs in yourself that aren't met and that you fear may never be met? How do you respond when you meet parts of yourself that are just fearful? Pluto, the lord of the underworld, dives down into the unconscious and will often bring to the surface the very last thing that we want to look at. However, it's totally okay to freak out in the moment as long as you don't continue freaking out and hold on to the position of refusing to change. The initial shock, the initial reaction, totally acceptable to go, holy crap, I wish that didn't happen. This really sucks. How do I get rid of that? That's an initial response. It's where you go with that that's going to determine how successful you are in making the desirable transformations indicated here.
So as we look at this full moon opposite the sun that's lined up with Pluto and square Uranus, we see this pattern here that's a pretty damned, Pluto likes the word damned because it's about being sent to the underworld or excluded. It's a pretty damn powerful dynamic here. But fortunately, there's other stuff cooking at this full moon, and in a moment I'm going to add back in the other colors that I took out, because we have Venus and Mercury, Venus the planet of love, Mercury the planet of communication, that are actually harmonizing with Uranus. And I'll do this while you talk, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, what that represents to a large degree is, while tension may be building up, that we have the intellectual capacity, that's cerebral brainy Mercury, and perhaps the social skills or values, that's Venus, to come up with some answers and some fresh approaches, so that minds can be pretty creative under these circumstances, which I think goes a long way to give us a chance to integrate change rather than run like hell from it.
So now what we can see here is this other pattern. Now it's important to understand that this other pattern here, this little triangle, this blue triangle, is not lined up with the sun. And often it's at a full moon or new moon, it's the angles to the moon and the sun that we look at first, which kind of really give a buzz or a flavor to the full moon or a new moon. But here we have Venus and Jupiter still kind of together in the sky. They joined up a few days ago. Jupiter is the planet of optimism, of opportunity, of good things in old astrology. Venus is the bringer of love, of sweet things. Not a bad combination to have these guys hanging out in the sky together. And now Venus in particular is harmonizing with both Mercury, the planet of the intellect, of logic, of thinking, of communicating, and Uranus, the revolutionary planet that we talked about earlier. What this suggests is that if we choose to communicate, if we choose to go out of our way and talk about it, and we do it in a manner that Venus is nice. Doesn't mean we need to bury it, but there's kind ways to bring things up, and there's unkind ways. And what this suggests is that if we can use language and be kind, we actually can create that upheaval, that revolution, without necessarily being totally destructive.
Yeah, I think that's well put. There's a planned news event tomorrow from the Hadron Collider in Europe, in which they're going to announce that a particle that
The God particle.
the God particle, the Higgs boson, it's called, which was theorized back in the mid-1960s. They haven't proven its existence, but they have reached another level of likelihood that it exists. And that's supposed to be announced tomorrow. And I find that to be very interesting because it's describing the structure of the universe.
Well, it's also the underpinning of the Big Bang or the many bangs. Right. Now, if you think of it, Uranus is the planet of the bang. It's the hearing the thunder after the lightning strikes. And in a way, the Higgs particle, the Higgs boson, is in some ways the experimental validation that everything really did come from nothing in the size of a pinhead. And that's kind of like, it's an interesting thing to happen because the experiments were announced earlier this week or last week. And this is part of that Uranus-Pluto square, I think.
Yeah, and I also think it's part of Pluto. Capricorn is structure, and it's structure of the material world. So Pluto, the mythological lord of the underworld, is bringing to the surface or bringing to another level of probability some profound structural element of the universe. Now, I doubt that there are too many particle physicists in the room, so where this is applicable in our own lives is, again, to have a willingness to look at the deep underlying structures that order your life. What are the rules that you've had imposed upon you by your family or by the culture? Do you choose to follow those rules, those expectations with your own volition? Or are you compelled to behave in a certain way because you were educated that way and it's habitual? Well, it's easier to strike out against the authority figure than to address our own internal authority. But that's really what this is about. Addressing your own internal authority, the rules that say, I must look like this, I must behave like this, I must aspire to this to be successful. The beauty of a Pluto transit, and this is very Plutonian, is if you're willing to get rid of something, and it is essential, it will come back. That sometimes we have to be willing to consider leaving our jobs, leaving our relationships, leaving our town to sort of clear the air and come back and look at these critical issues from a fresh perspective. It's not about being destructive, it's about dismantling things so then we can choose what to rebuild or not.
Well said. Pluto is really about the larger cycles that we don't notice. You've heard me speak about Pluto before in reference to the caterpillar and the butterfly. You know, this is a plutonic transmutation. The caterpillar comes back. Caterpillar dies, or at least apparently disintegrates, isn't there anymore. It's a justification, if you will, astrologically for reincarnation. It's what's important comes back. It comes back transformed, it comes back different. But there is no end at the end. It's just a change.
Right. Now, we do have a player in this game.
Oh, we sure do.
Mars going into Libra. But before I talk about that, it's funny. I'm going to play Rick's side. Rick can do a good job sometimes of taking a good, what's considered to be a favorable astrological pattern and describing it as a problem. And Rick talked about...
Because I'm a negative person.
He's a deep person. He's deeply negative. But Rick...
No, I'm not.
Rick talked about the fact that Jupiter, the planet of growth, expansion, optimism, and opportunity, lucky Jupiter, has been joined with lucky Venus, the planet of love, attraction, pleasure, and self-worth. All of that's very sweet and nice.
Self-indulgence.
Self-indulgence, and all of this is occurring in Gemini, conjoined with a point called the Moon's South Node. And the South Node of the Moon tends to be like a swamp or some quicksand where we can get caught. And because we've got all of this joviality, which is what Jupiter is all about, he's by Jove, all of this joviality in Gemini, and then Mars, the warrior planet, going into gracious Libra, I think we've got a high degree of social skills to avoid dealing with the bigger issues. So it's almost like, somebody is bleeding to death on the sidewalk over there, and instead of addressing the mortality or the seriousness of the situation, people are being very polite with one another and talking about what a gorgeous day it is. So distractions, although they can be socially enjoyable, can also be a way, obviously, not to touch the deeper issues that seem to be going on.
But it won't last.
Okay.
Well, because where you started talking about Mars moving into Libra, and even though Libra is graceful, Mars is the warrior planet, Mars in Libra might be thought of as martial arts. It's diplomacy. It's working with that assertive, aggressive Martian energy in a way that's harmonious and balanced.
Or that doesn't look aggressive.
That doesn't look aggressive, but it's the strategist. I always think of President Eisenhower as general. Was a Libra. And this wasn't someone who was drawing blood on the battlefield, but this was the person playing a chess game with the world. And that's what the art, I always think of the book, the Chinese book, The Art of Warfare or The Art of War. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a Mars and Libra thing. It's how to respond and balance in a way that one either gains position or at least holds position. So we've had Mars since normally Mars spends about 6 weeks in each sign, about. However, once every other year, when the Earth gets on the same side of the sun as Mars, and Mars and the Earth come close together, because we lose perspective, as we do when any planet comes close to Earth, that planet goes retrograde. Mars went retrograde earlier this year in January in the sign of Virgo. So instead of spending 6 weeks in Virgo, Mars spent 6 months, actually 7 months plus.
In lieu of 7 weeks. It's 7 weeks normally.
7 weeks, thank you. So what we've had is Mars being stuck in Virgo, which is an analytical and careful sign, plus going backwards from Earth's point of view. And now, today, Mars moved into the sign of Libra, and in some ways it's like Mars is breathing a sigh of relief, having finally been released from the analytical constraints of practical Virgo, gets into Libra where he's not totally happy anyhow, but, and here's why why all the denial in the world is not going to hold this together, and that is, just like the full moon lined up with Pluto and squared Uranus and is opposing the sun, as Mars moves on through Libra over the next week and a half, it's going to oppose Uranus and square Pluto. And Jeff said earlier, when the faster moving planets trigger these slower moving planets, that's where the action is. Well, the moon is very fast. It triggers this once every 7 days, because in 1 week, the moon will be here triggering it. In 2 weeks, it'll be here. In 3 weeks, it'll be here. Next month, it'll be there. So the moon is hitting this boom, 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 boom every week. The sun is only hitting it once a year, well, actually 4 times a year, because it'll hit here and then square and then here and then here. But Mars, which has been in this section of the chart in Virgo for the last 7 months, now Mars is coming and it's going to hit those points, and this is not going to be a dance in the park.
No. And the funny part of it is, Mars is the planet of aggression or assertion. It's got sort of a hurry up kind of energy. So I don't think Mars is happy being in any sign for more than, for 7 months. That is not comfortable for Mars. And although Mars, in principle, or our capacity to take action, may feel a little bit more open now that Mars has moved into Libra, there's a real sort of fake it side to Mars in Libra. Again, it's the diplomat. The diplomat, we might think, well, the diplomat's nonviolent. But diplomats, through the agreements that they have forged, have caused as much destruction and death as any of the generals in the world. It's just done in a political form rather than in a military form. And traditional astrology doesn't like Mars in Libra. It suggests that the warrior planet, or one's capacity to act spontaneously and to have the vitality of muscular Mars, is diminished in Libra because the spontaneity of Mars, the capacity to act, is inhibited by the need to calculate the response. And even though it looks pretty polite, diplomatic, and gracious, it can be the one who is smiling at you and saying all of the pleasing things, and Mars is going to be very nice for a week or so. It's going to form harmonious aspects to this happy group in Gemini. But as Rick pointed out, in the middle of the month, it'll be on the 17th and 18th of this month, Mars, which is the trigger, really, hits Uranus and Pluto.
And we'll get to that in a moment, because that's also the new moon.
Right.
And so we're going to go from one tough lunation, today's full moon, to in a fortnight, in 2 weeks, at the new moon is going to be the same time when Mars is in the picture. So we're not getting out of this one, easily.
Well, I think what it means is this too. Anywhere you've successfully bullshitted your way into something that you shouldn't have gotten into has a reasonable chance of blowing up before the month is over. So if you are teetering on the edge between your highest ethical self and your most convenient, easygoing way to slide through something, give it a second thought. Taking a small hit now is probably going to be less costly than BSing your way through things and getting the bigger hit later this month.
So let's come back to Mars and the new moon in a minute. Let's shift focus for a moment and talk about Mercury, which also, like Mars, runs through a sign in 7 weeks, except when it's retrograde.
No, in a month.
Mars runs through a sign, I'm sorry.
Oh, Mercury.
Mars runs through a sign normally we were talking about Mars earlier. Mars, which runs through a sign normally in about 7 weeks. When it goes retrograde, takes about 7 months to go through that sign. Normally, Mercury runs through a sign in about 3.5 weeks. When Mercury goes retrograde, it can stay in the same sign for that same 3, or it can stay. It goes retrograde for about 3 weeks, and it can stay in a sign for a couple of months.
Yeah.
And we're coming into a point where, although things are becoming more volatile as Mars moves closer and closer to the aspects that we talked about mid-month, we're also coming into a Mercury retrograde, which puts a strange twist onto this.
Yeah, Mercury is probably the most obvious and the most dynamic of the retrograde or apparent backward cycles. Happens 3 times a year for 3 weeks at a shot. Mercury, the messenger, the communicator, the planet of details. When it is retrograde, it is associated with communication screw-ups and delays, technological breakdowns, travel troubles. I mean, it's astrologers are very big on Mercury retrograde because a lot of our clients know about that. And yet, Rick and I will joke sometimes about, the computer doesn't work and Mercury is not retrograde. And we'll joke, we'll go Mercury retrograde even though it isn't. The point is this: while there is a greater likelihood for communication, chaos, and snafus, it does not mean that overnight we become stupid and incompetent and incapable of moving forward in our lives.
Some people do.
Well, not overnight. Mercury is in Leo, a fixed sign. They're going to get stupid at a slower pace.
Good to know.
But the point is that every pattern has a constructive and positive purpose. And that when planets move retrograde and, in a sense, backtrack through the part of the sky that they'd already occupied from our perspective here on Earth, it does as well give us a second chance to address things, to tie up loose ends, to complete things again that haven't been finished.
Right, and right now we have the sun in Cancer, which tends to move slowly forward. In other words, Cancer, the crab, is much better at moving backward or sideways than moving forward. And so we have a lot of energy cooking, but we have the sun in Cancer kind of holding the energy back. Even though it's change behind the curtain, behind the shell, at home, it's inner change. And into that, we have Mercury, which has moved into Leo. Mercury is communication. Leo is expression. It's outwardly manifesting. And we'll talk more about Leo in a bit because the sun moves into Leo later this month. But Leo is the summer sun, of course, which we don't have any of here in Seattle yet. But as Mercury in Leo becomes more expressive and more intellectually engaging, and then it begins to slow down. And so all the desire for this communication is still there. But Mercury begins to slow down and go backward, just like that crab going backward. And so, and it's at this same point that Mars is getting closer and closer and closer to this anger, aggression, assertion, warrior point. And so we have, like we often do in astrology, we often have cycles within cycles. One says you're tall, the other says you're short. You're short. Well, which are you? Tall or short? Well, here the energy is going to be building, and the aggression and the dynamics are going to be stirring up that stew, and yet we may not want to or be able to talk about it so easily.
Yeah, I think that's often the case with Mercury retrograde. We do have the issue, though, that Mercury is in Leo, a sign that's bold and brassy. And it's interesting what we do when we don't have the information that we should have.
Is this a fake it story?
Yeah, because I think there is a tendency sometimes with planets, particularly in positive outgoing fire signs, to just, well, let me come up with it. Well, let me say something. Maybe I'll get away with it. Maybe if I just start opening my mouth and talking before I'm done talking, I'll know what the hell I'm talking about and actually make some sense. So I think one of the things that's interesting to look at with Mercury retrograde in Leo is be careful of the promises that you make. And that, again, as Rick talked about, we have forces driving forward, yet Mercury is going retrograde. The sun in Cancer is not the most secure place for the sun. Be careful about compensation. Compensating for what you don't know or you can't figure out. One of the best things to do with the Mercury retrograde period, if you don't know the answer or you don't have a good answer, is say, give me a little more time. I'd like to look at that. I'd like to rethink that. And let me get back to you with an answer that I've studied more seriously.
In fact, any word that begins, or most any word that begins with re, R-E, is a good Mercury retrograde word, whether it's to rethink, reconsider, review, revision, revise. I'm done.
I'm thinking of all the RE words that don't
I
fit.
know, you were going to get me into trouble really quickly.
I know.
So as we, do we want to move on toward the new moon then? Or do we
Yeah, let's do the new moon.
So as we're moving closer to the new moon, it's actually on July 14th that Mercury turns retrograde. And then it's on the 16th and 17th. On the 17th, Mars kicks in with an exact trine to Jupiter This is harmonious, enthusiastic, energetically expressive, and its opposition, first it's square to Pluto, which is powerful and intense and even struggles for expression of power or control, and then its opposition to Uranus, which certainly can be explosive, and this is all leading up to and tied up with the moon, which on the 17th and then on the 18th, the moon actually reaches its full position.
It's conjunction with the sun.
Conjunction. I'm sorry, it's new
For
moon
those of you
position.
who are unfamiliar, this is a program called Solar Fire. The thicker the lines are, the more exact the aspects or angular relationships between the planets are. So as a general rule, the thicker the line, the more powerful the influence is. And as you can see, we have a bunch of fat lines here. This is called a T-square when two planets oppose each other, Mars and Uranus, and a third planet makes a right angle to them. And that is a powerful, explosive combination. And yet, here's the interesting thing, as Rick mentioned, Mars, the action planet, boom, boom, is in the most harmonious relationship, a trine, an angle of 120 degrees, indicated by the blue line, a free flow of energy. So what's interesting is we've got this free flow of energy, like getting great new skis and having perfect snow, that you can go down the mountain faster than you've gone before.
No resistance.
No resistance. Very good. That's a Mars-Jupiter trine. And yet, the potential for running into surprises, Uranus, or encountering some consequence, some preconsidered consequence with the square to Pluto is really there.
You know, I was thinking, Jeff, as you said that, that's all totally true. Mars is trining the Jupiter, no resistance, squaring the Pluto, which is a fight to the finish. I mean, who's in charge? And opposing explosive Uranus, that's like a no holds barred, don't hold back. But at the same time, on the day of the full moon, actually the day after it's exact, Jupiter also is forming a harmonious or supportive sextile with Uranus. So it's almost like the Mars-Uranus opposition, which is really like a tug of war between energetic, feisty, fiery, assertive Mars and Uranus that just wants to relieve the tension by cutting the rope and letting people both fall into the mud or off both ends of the cliffs on either side. Uranus doesn't give a shit about who wins. Uranus just wants the tension gone. I mean, by burning the fire, by lightning striking, by blowing the whole sucker up. But into that, we have Jupiter, which is allowing us to express the energy, and in some ways, it's flowing around here to Uranus that gives us a way to think of something that's new and different. It's an inventive way to get through this that we've never been through before, perhaps in a way that doesn't blow it up completely. I think it's a great day for the aliens to land.
Or to leave, whichever, because I'm tired of them in my backyard. They're messing up
White
the
House.
lawn. Yeah. My dog hates them. But Ricky,
Wait, your dog hates everything.
Yeah, that's true. Well, he's a smart dog. But Jupiter is a planet of wisdom and meaning. And while traditional astrologer considers Jupiter in Gemini to be a little dicey because it can take something small, Gemini's like data, and blow it up into a whole philosophical principle, which is Jupiter's domain, the positive side here of this harmonious Jupiter connection to Mars and Uranus is that if you are flexible, Jupiter is in Gemini, the sign of duality. If you have multiple paths that you can go to, then even if you are going down that mountain at high speed and find yourself heading towards a tree, you would have the flexibility and the adaptability to lean right, go around it, find another path. So the wisdom, which is a good Jupiter word, that may turn chaos and destruction into genius and construction is, I think, a flexibility of mind. The more rigid we are, the less likely we are to be successful.
And there's another thing that supports that, and that is in the days leading up to that new moon, the sun forms a 90-degree square with Saturn, which is about rigidity. It's about bumping into walls. It's about meeting those things which we have to overcome as obstacles that are probably indicating the weaknesses of either our plans or of our previous actions. And as we move close to that new moon, the new moon, even though it's just a couple of degrees past, is still picking up on the sense of the restraint from Saturn, and here hopefully some of that wisdom of this Jupiter that's basically saying let it all flow. Hopefully there's enough restraint to not let it all flow.
Right. A new moon, once a month, generally, the sun and moon join together. The conscious and unconscious are on the same side. That's rich, that's nourishing, particularly in the nourishing maternal familial water sign of Cancer. But Cancer tends to view the world from its own subjective perspective.
And fear often.
Often, how to protect and hold on to what we've got. Saturn, the planet of hard, cold reality, forming a right angle to that new moon in Cancer, is a reminder that we've got to consider things outside of ourselves. Because Saturn is in Libra, the sign of the other. So if we have the maturity, that's a Saturn word, if we have the patience and the sense of responsibility, also Saturn concepts, to find a space of objectivity. How do my security needs affect those around me? How does that fit into the world in which I live? Then this new moon has the potential of being a time when you lay down a foundation or establish a blueprint that's going to lead to something constructive. The whole thing with Cancer, I think, is Cancer is the mother and the infant. If we are on the infantile side of it, we're going to run into walls. If, however, we're on the maternal nurturing side, which is a dynamic process, that nurturance is dynamic. It doesn't say, I'm going to feed you the same thing every day, no matter what. It says, I love you, I care for you, I'm going to respond to you, and I'm going to try to give you what you need as you need it, and recognize that you are being in fluctuation as the world is. Cancer works well when it understands fluctuations. Cancer is associated with the moon, the planet that changes the most rapidly, almost before our eyes. And that if we have or include that, rather than being infantile and say, this is the only way I'm going to be safe, rather than going, hey, this is a direction in which to look for safety or success, and yet we're going to keep checking in, keep our fingers to the wind, so that we can respond appropriately as conditions change, because they always do.
I think that one of the key factors as we come closer to the end of the month after this new moon, and that actually is a key factor right now, today and tomorrow, comes back to the planet Mercury. Remember, Mercury, I'm going to just run this back really quickly, because you can see here that today, tomorrow, Mercury at 8 degrees of Leo is harmoniously trine Uranus at 8 degrees of Aries.
It's good for fireworks.
Fireworks. Well, but it's also good for intellectual fireworks. It's not so much about arguing, it's about sitting in a group of people and your idea sparks my idea sparks someone else's, and it's this kind of fire, it's like an intellectual feeding frenzy for ingenious, inventive, new thoughts, new ideas. So you can see here that Mercury, we start the month off, actually, like I said, tomorrow on July 4th, we start the month off with Mercury moving direct and harmonizing with Uranus. But then as we move on through the month, Mercury slows down, it turns retrograde, it begins moving backwards from Earth's point of view, and by the end of the month on the where we go, right there, on the 25th, Mercury is again for a second time. And this is an important thing about retrogrades, is sometimes an aspect that only lasts a day typically can repeat a couple, 2 or 3 times over the course of weeks or months. And so we have Mercury now forming a second harmonious trine with Uranus on the 25th. Mercury then turns direct on August 4th. And then next month when we're here, we'll talk about Mercury's third and final harmonious trine with Uranus in August. But I think here what this indicates is that a lot of the work that we can do is work in communication and not being afraid of going places that we've never gone before, talking about things that are new and different, and being revolutionary in our mind.
Yeah, I think that's good. And a word that comes up in my head is provisional, that you can make statements, have ideas, have concepts, but they're provisional. They are dependent upon what else you learn, what else comes up. In fact, on the 21st of the month, Jupiter forms a 60-degree sextile, also a harmonious positive integration of two energies, Jupiter of higher mind, aligning with Uranus, the planet of innovation, is another wave of intellectual input. And so it's very interesting. You might have a creative project or an idea, and it looks really good, and you really like it, and it has original stuff in it, and then you let it simmer a little bit, and then you see it in a larger context and framework, and you can adapt it, you can adjust it, or you can add more to it.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. We kind of talked about that a little bit when we were back at the new moon, and Mars is trining Jupiter, which wasn't quite yet exactly sextiling Uranus, and now we're here a couple of days, few days after the new moon, and I think the order in which things happens is important, because some of this stress is kind of going on simmer. It's not going away, but Mars has moved past this absolute critical zone by the 21st. The sun is moving out of retentive, passive, fearful, nurturing, security-driven Cancer and moving into Leo. And I think here the energy does shift a little bit, and it gives us perhaps the illusion of a good solution.
Yeah, or at least...
or a good solution that's provisional, like you were saying.
Right, and it's interesting, on the 22nd of the month, the sun makes its monthly change of signs, and it moves from Cancer, which tends to be more indrawn and self-protective, to Leo, which is more extroverted, outgoing. When that sun goes into Leo, what I find particularly interesting is that it follows sort of Mercury's track, meaning that by the 30th of the month, the sun of will and consciousness forms a harmonious trine with Uranus. The difference between the sun and Mercury, and there are many, is Mercury represents a concept. The sun represents a core, a heart, a conscious self. So it means, to a certain extent, that maybe whatever bright ideas that have been cooking up with Mercury activity, then you find out at the end of the month how willing you are to commit to them, how much you put your core or your heart or your life force into following up on the idea that sounds good, but with which you haven't really made a serious commitment.
And although our contract with Soulfood prohibits us from talking specifically about anything in August, because that's the way we get you back here next month, I just want to point out that as the sun makes this harmonious trine with Uranus, as Mercury did, as the sun makes this harmonious trine to Uranus, just a few days later, in August, it makes that sextile to Jupiter, which again, it reinforces the uplifting, the wisdom side of this. And then, of course, Mercury now, which is moving direct here, catches up and runs through that. It's almost like we get to do the cleanup in August one more time with our brains, with our mind, to maybe... So the rhythm here is important, because this square is actually waning. You can see this one line got narrower and narrower and then dropped off. And so the tension wanes, the expression builds, and then the actual doing it, the core, the being comes through, and it actually works with that energy, I think, in a profoundly positive way. I like the end of this month.
Yeah, well, the sun going into Leo can often be uplifting. And if Cancer is the relationship between the mother and the infant, Leo is really the child that has a bit more capacity to express itself. We move out of the hyper-dependent stage of infancy and begin to feel as if we are creative forces in the world. That's an annual gift of the sun's transit through Leo. but I think the rhythm and the patterns that you described, Rick, reinforce that this month as we get to the end of month with that sense that, hey, I can create a life that's going to be exciting and interesting and healthy.
One other positive thing that happens at the end of the month that I think it's incumbent upon us to mention, and that is, remember, Venus had been retrograde. This has been a strange year. Since January, the three inner planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Mercury a second time, have been retrograde one after another after another. And so, although there's been progress being made on some very deep and profound levels, in our personal lives, it almost seems like it's like one step forward, two steps backwards, which is the wrong way to do it. And now it seems like Mercury, being the last of these inner planets to make the retrograde as it turns in August, will get some real forward motion. But Venus, which has been retrograde, now Venus turned direct 3 days ago?
Yeah, it was June 27th.
Okay, so a week
retrograde
ago.
May 15th to June 27th.
Thank you. So now that Venus is going direct, Venus is now moving through the territory of Gemini, where it already had been. It went retrograde, and now it's moving a third and final time. Now, here's the thing to think about. On the day that Venus went retrograde on May 15th, I keep Jeff around for the dates because he remembers things because he's younger than I am. Whatever. On the day that Mercury went retrograde, it had moved far enough along in Gemini that it was a hair's breadth away from making a trine to Saturn. If you just looked at the textbooks, there was no trine from Venus to Saturn because it was just minutes from being exact, and the tables that we use typically look at the exact aspects only. So Venus, the planet of love, of desire, of nice things, was just barely making contact with a harmonious trine to Saturn, the planet of endurance, the planet of longevity. And so it may be that those things that were important to us in life, things that we love, things that we're attracted to, we were willing to put in for the long haul rather than the quick gratification. But then Venus turned retrograde, and now it's going direct. And on the last day of the month, on the
31st.
On the 31st, which I think is the last day of the month, Venus makes within a day of the Sun's harmonious trine to Uranus, Venus is making a harmonious trine to Saturn. Uranus is about blow it all up, break through, release the tension no matter what. Saturn is about hold on to it. Don't blow it all at once. Make it last. Make it endure. And so I think here we have a really sweet balance with these two strong trines at the end of the month.
Yeah, I mean, the Sun in Leo trine Uranus is about excitement. And Saturn trine Venus is about social and financial safety. So if you're going to go on some wild ride, it better be safe. And this is a good combination of safety and excitement or risk-taking.
Right. Or if someone decides to join us in Bali this October, they just better make sure they have the money in the bank to do it.
Right. Or we'll send you home. So I think that's it. That's our overview for this month. What we're going to do is take a 10 to 15 minute break, and we encourage you to patronize Soulfood. This is how we can keep this going. This wonderful community asset is supported not by the admissions you paid to come in here tonight, but
The exorbitant admission.
But by your patronage of the goods, the wonderful things that are here. If you'd like us to look at your chart, Rick and I are going to do like 3 mini readings, a quick 3 to 4 minute look at charts. Write your first name, time, date, and place of birth on a piece of paper, fold it up, toss it on the table here behind our lovely videographer, Julie.
And we'll randomly pick a few out of the pile, a $100 bill attached to any of the birth data.
Defeats randomness.
Yeah, defeats randomness.
So thanks very much. We'll see you back here in...
About 15 minutes.
Great.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Soulfood. And a special thanks to Craig and Lily, who are making our drinks tonight and taking care of keeping all this together. and happy full moon.
Be careful, mics are on. Just say. Thank you, Julie, the lovely videographer. Good job. You too. See? It's I'm writing all about August now. For Thoreau, I'm writing, looking at that Mars-Saturn conjunction.
Yes, that's where all this leads to. Because the sun's having a very Sagittarius.
Right.
A revolution never come with a warning. Revolution never sends you an omen. Revolution just arrive like the morning. Ring the alarm, we come to wake up this morning. They're telling you to never worry about the future. They're telling you to never worry about the torture. They're telling you that you will never see the horror. Spend it all today and we will build you tomorrow. BBC to make accounts in Bahamas. Wall Street crime will never send you to the slammer. Tell all the children in the arms of the mamas. The F-15 is a homicide bomber. TV commercial for a pop of you culture. Drug companies circling like a vulture. Amaraki babies with a G.I. Joe father. 10 years from now, is anybody gonna bother you? Fire! Yo! Yo, 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 here we come, here we come. Fire! Yo! Yo, 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 revolution will come. Fire! Yo! Yo, 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 here we come, here we come. Fire! Yo! Yo, 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 revolution will come. Everyone addicted to the same nicotine. Everyone addicted to the same gasoline. Everyone addicted to a technicolor screen. Everybody trying to get their hands on the same green. From the banks of the river to the banks of the greedy. All of the riches taken back by the needy. We come from the country and we come from the city. Play us on the record, you can play us on the CD. All the shit you giving us is fertilizer. The seeds that we planted, you can never brutalize them. Tell the corporation they could never globalize it. Like Peter Tosh said, legalize it. Girls and boys hear the bass and treble. Rumble in the speakers and they make you wanna rebel. Throw your hands up, take it to another level. And you never ever ever make a deal with the devil. Yo, fire, yo, we yo, 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 here they come, here they come. Fire, yo, we yo, 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 revolution I come. Fire, yo, we yo, 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 here they come, here they come. Fire, yo, we yo, yo, revolution I come. Boom. come to wake up the snoring. They're telling you to never worry about the future. They're telling you to never worry about the torture. They're telling you that you will never see the horror. Spend it all today and we will bill you tomorrow. Three-piece suits and bank accounts in Bahamas. Wall Street crime will never send you through the slammer. Tell all the children in the arms of the mamas. The F-15 is a homicide bomber. TV commercial for a pop-up pill culture. Drug companies circling like a vulture. Amaraki babies with the G.I. Joe father. 10 years from now, is anybody gonna bother you? Fire! Yo! Yo, yo, yo. Here it come, here it come. Fire! Yo! Yo, yo, yo. Revolution a come. Fire! Here we come, here we come. Revolution will come. Everyone addicted to the same nicotine. Everyone addicted to the same gasoline. Everyone addicted to a technicolor screen. Everybody trying to get their hands on the same green. From the banks of the river to the banks of the greedy. All of the riches taken back by the needy. We come from the country and we come from the city. Play us on the record, you can play us on the CD. All the shit you giving us is fertilizer. The seeds that we planted, you can never brutalize them. Tell the corporation they can never globalize it. Like Peter Tosh said, legalize it. Girls and boys hear the bass and treble. Rumble in the speakers in and make you wanna rebel. Throw your hands up, take it to another level. And you never ever ever make a deal with the devil. Yeah, fire! Yeah, fire! Revolution will come. Yeah, fire! Yo! Yo, yo, yo. Here they come, here they come. I want to see you all jumping!
Okay.
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 All right, we're going to take a look. In celebration of the full moon, we're going to take a quick look at 4 charts tonight, not 3 charts. So first we're going to take a look at Natalie. Natalie, hi, how are you? Fascinating. All right, let's look at the next chart now. Well, it's kind of interesting, Natalie. Usually when we look at a chart, there are clusters, and here things are spread out pretty widely, which is, probably why it's taking us a little bit longer, that and senility, to hone in on some key items
The
here.
longer it takes, the more the senility is going to settle in.
Sits in. But then they'll forget, too. Well, what were we talking about? Yeah, exactly. What's kind of interesting, starting with the sun and moon is not a bad way to initialize an astrological interpretation. And Natalie has the sun in Taurus and the moon in Cancer, both of which tend to be cautious signs. However, there are a number of counterpoints to that.
Before we get to the however and the counterpoints on the same theme, we also have the sun harmonized or trine to Saturn, which is a third indicator of the, holding on to the status quo of the inertia as being an important concept.
Right, but there are an equal number of contrary indications.
Yes.
Contraindications. Uranus, the planet of weird, strange electric out of the box, was in a 90-degree square to the sun, which means I ain't your normal Taurus. It's more about having a life of radical discovery and breakthrough and growth rather than just sitting with the Taurus Cancer status quo. Additionally, the ascendant or the rising sign, which is how we meet new situations, is Aries. The
0 degrees is the first moment of Aries, which is the strongest, I think, point in Aries, because Aries is about starting, and that's the 0 degree Aries point, along with Venus there. So yeah, there's definitely that sense of the impulse.
And lastly, or maybe not lastly, Mars, the planet of action, is in bold, risk-taking Leo, and directly opposite bigger, better, more Jupiter. So typically we would think of a Taurus with a Cancer moon as being someone who is quite cautious, quite careful in how they spend their time, their money, their energy, yet there's some more, a bit of a high roller here as well.
In attempt to agree with you more, I also want to point out that on the side of the movement, we have also Mercury, the communicator planet in Gemini, which is also very different than the cautious or staid part of the chart, because that Mercury is the mind, it's how we interact. Gemini is fast, it connects the dots. It doesn't care whether the information is valid or useful, it just wants more, it wants data.
Yeah, most people have more than their sun in their sun sign. And that's because from our point of view on Earth, Mercury never gets more than 1 sign away, Venus never more than 2 signs away. So it's quite common to have 2, even 3 planets, sometimes more, in your sun sign. Natalie only has the sun in Taurus, and in fact, Venus, which is Taurus's traditional Kia ruling planet, is also in Let's Get Moving Aries. So there's lots of contrast, which in a constructive sense, suggests the possibility of being an innovative person who's able to take that which she is inventing and being persistent to make it real and to bring it down to earth. That would be a positive connection of the essentially conservative sun and moon, with everybody else being much more experimental and radical.
I think that I would imagine that Natalie, for a determined, practical Taurus, is a bit more confused in general, or uncertain of what it is she's doing or where she's going, because we have not only Mars is opposite Jupiter, which pumps the energy up, and that's the enthusiasm, but both Mars and Jupiter are square to Neptune. Neptune is the planet of uncertainty, of dissolved boundaries. It's a spiritual, certainly an imaginative planet, but I think it can make knowing where one is going sometimes tougher than actually going there.
Yeah, and it complicates relationships. The sun and moon in Taurus and Cancer are down in your chart in more personal areas. Aries rising, that's the first sign. So the big three, sun, moon, and ascendant, tend to be much more self-aware. Yet, this Neptune, which I think Rick was wise to point out, is a key player here. Neptune of confusion, diffusion, projection of illusion, and fantasy is in the 8th house of shared resources or deep exchanges with others, which means to a certain extent that when you get involved, you can get really enthusiastic, when you can be generous, and give a lot, do all of that stuff. You may have a tendency to attract people who do not reciprocate or who don't know where the hell they're coming from. That allows you.
I see the laughter of familiarity.
Right. There's a mechanism at work. And what that mechanism does is it allows you to engage in a compassionate, idealistic, outgoing way, but without really building up the dependencies that relationships tend to bring, because other people are so damn unreliable. So just count on Nate.
You talked earlier about how the planets, there's not a single point of focus, or they're kind of spread out. And I think that one of the things that does is it gives Natalie the ability to interact in lots of different areas without putting all of her eggs in one basket. That there's always something else going on. On a good day when everything is really awesome, something still sucks. And on a really bad day when everything sucks, something's still awesome. And so it allows you to maintain that place that Taurus likes, and that is that there's always a sense of enough going on, which is un-Taurus-like. But for Natalie, I think it allows her to maintain that sense of self or stability or whatever, because it's hard for enough to pull you off track.
In terms of current events, a very interesting one is the transit or the slow movement of Neptune, which has come close to and will come back to what's called the Moon's South Node, a karmic point. I mentioned it earlier as kind of a quicksand place. Yours is in Pisces, in the 12th house, the area behind the scenes, joined with the wounded healer Chiron. Pisces is ruled or associated with Neptune, and it reinforces, I think, that idea that you may be good at sacrificing or giving, but that might not always be a good thing for you. And particularly now, with Neptune over the next year hanging out at the south node of yours, it's important, I think, not to allow your idealism to lead you in a place where you're bled dry mentally, emotionally, or physically.
Thanks, Natalie.
Yay, Natalie! Tauruses must always be applauded. I think that would be appropriate behavior here.
Samantha.
Samantha? Hi.
Don't be shy. Yeah, that's better. If we don't know who we are, it's hard to make fun of you, you know?
That's right.
It's like,
Well, what's really, there are a number of things that pop out here, but one, maybe we'll get back to it, is the fact that the moon of emotion and feeling is in Libra, and that moon makes a close square or right angle with Uranus in the birth chart, which means I try to be cooperative. I really try to understand other people, but they drive me flippin' crazy. And I need to Uranus is a planet of independence, and yet the moon in Libra is a strong emotional need to justify itself in the eyes of others. And that moon is in the 11th house of groups and friends and all of that. And the sun in Virgo is in that. The helpful sun in Virgo is also in that 11th house. And these points are very active now because transiting Uranus is hanging out there.
and Mars is heading right there right
Right.
now. The next few weeks are pretty intense and active. Look, if you were my client, I'd basically charge you the full price and give you the 30-second reading and say, just don't carry matches and a fuse in the same pocket.
That's for whom is that a good idea?
Definitely
Aquaman,
not.
I guess.
Definitely, yeah. Well, the thing here is, I think you're right, Jeff. I think that we have the aspect lines to the moon turned off. Let me just turn that back on so you can see that. What you talked about this, but it wasn't showing up.
Right.
The square between Uranus and the moon, which is really electric and rebellious and radical. And yet it's the moon. It's how you feel. It's not necessarily always what you do. However, you have Scorpio rising with Pluto in Scorpio rising, coming up over the ascendant, which Scorpio rising often has the ability to contain their feelings, sometimes because they're so intense that if they don't contain them, it just singes the people around who don't want to play with you anymore, you know? And yet, when you meet someone who can actually take that intensity, it's a very profound, it's very intense. It's nothing. There's nothing lighthearted about that Pluto rising in Scorpio, especially harmonizing with Venus. These are intense, profound, powerful feelings that I think somehow the moon square Uranus, this need to either blow things up or to kind of be the radical in some ways, is your preventive game so that you don't have to go deep and then find out how much people can't necessarily go there with you or take it.
Yeah, Pluto rising people, that is, people who have Pluto in the first house of their chart, are often
Committed.
very committed, very aware of their shadows, of the things that's wrong or with them, and usually in an exaggerated way. So one of the complexities here is that means, I think, that you're deep and that there's a process of deep self-examination, which is a healthy thing to do with psychological Pluto rising. But in the 8th house, the house of deep sharing, you have Mars in superficial Gemini. So it can either mean that you dance around with other people so they don't see the deep darkness in your heart, or, that when you do, it scares off the skittish ones. And I think what it really means, or what it can mean, is that you've got the right to change how you are depending upon who you're with and what's going on in the moment. That Mars in Gemini, instead of just being superficial, can be flexible. I'm going to be intense. We're going to deal with this heavy-duty stuff. Now, let's go dance. That right to move among different things, I think, gives you the capacity to have the lightness when you want it, but also have the depth when you need it.
Mars also, Mars is really wired in this chart. It's square Mercury, it's sextile Jupiter, it's trine the moon. It's wired for better and worse. And in ancient astrology, Mars was the planet that was related to Scorpio, not just like we moderners say Aries. In fact, an ancient technique was to look at what sign was on the eastern horizon, Scorpio for you, and then say the planet that ruled or is connected to that sign becomes the single most important planet in someone's chart, called the chart ruler. Your chart is ruled by Mars, as Jeff said, in that lighthearted tap dancing Gemini, but it's tap dancing on the most intense stage, in the zodiac or in the arena.
Yeah. An important thing, you don't have to be God. Just
Goddess.
take that off of your agenda. That's coming from Jupiter, which was Thor, is a kind of higher mind consciousness. The illusion of God, goddess if you like, is joined with your lunar south node, which is an old karmic pattern. I have to be this, I have to do this. And Jupiter, you have to be generous. You have to understand everything. You have to rise above your shadow and all of your stuff. And I think a balance point, the north node of the moon, is in Aquarius, which is just let yourself be a person who is here to explore and experiment and have the wide range of weirdness and experience that fits this chart.
I think from a timing standpoint, I think that Oftentimes when we astrologers have clients and they want to know what's happening, sometimes the most important thing that's happening is what's recently happened. Now that doesn't mean that there's not important stuff coming up, but over the past couple of years, Uranus has lined up with your sun, as it does once every 84 years. Did it maybe about 4 years ago. And then about a year ago, up through a few months ago, Uranus was lined up with your moon. I don't think it comes back to that 4 degrees quite. And so what I want to say is that the amount of freedom and change and unpredictable crazy shit that's gone down for you over the past couple of years, in some ways is the ticket. It's not quite done, but you've been given the ticket to get out of whatever it is that you've been stuck in. It's been some crazy and some difficult stuff, because Saturn also, as Uranus was moving opposite these points, Saturn was lining up with them over the last year or so. So there's some tough stuff that you've been through, and yet I think that phase of it is largely settling down.
Yeah, and hopefully as a result of that, you've got either a clear picture or at least a glimpse of something that would free you from old patterns. Where it's going to take you, yet you might not know
Don't
yet.
know yet, yeah.
But at least you've got one foot out of the mud of old expectations, friends, groups, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? All right. Let's take a look at another one. Gee, guys.
Are they applauding us or Samantha?
I think Sam,
Natalie.
the victim, the survivor.
They're applauding that we've done another chart and the person hasn't died.
That's right.
While we're doing the chart. Hate it
Yeah.
when that happens. Crystal.
Hi, Crystal.
Hi, Crystal.
All right. Look at this chart, how there's a lot of tight aspects. You see how many thick lines there are? And there's a very important pattern, The moon of emotion and feeling is in bold, expressive Leo, but it's next to control yourself, Saturn. It's a very interesting combination. It's like a fire that has to be contained, because Saturn is a planet with a ring around it. It represents boundaries and containment, and yet Leo is warm, expressive, and fiery.
And it's 90 degrees to both the Sun and Mercury, communication in Taurus, and Uranus. There's this, it's almost like that containment is almost, it's like if you ever let go. And so there's this whole process of either having your parents contain you or say you can't or you shouldn't, and yet at the same time there's a part that needs to or wants to break out, and hopefully as you continue to grow and move through life, hopefully there'll be this sense of actually figuring out ways to either untie or to loosen up, because there's a lot of energy tied up here, and that's very powerful. This is not a negative thing unto itself at all. It's incredibly creative, and there's a lot of self-control, but there has to be a lot of self-control because there's a lot of erratic craziness floating around in the corners, which is very exciting, or at least certainly can be, and it's also very deeply, profoundly loving. I mean, look at this fiery energy from the moon and Saturn to Venus. It's like you know what you like and know what you want, and you don't take it lightly.
Yeah, it's interesting, this chart, because we're pulled in several directions.
Yes.
Which is not that rare. I mean, it's not, this chart is perfect. It's everything you need to be you, and it takes a whole lifetime to do it. But one of the things I think this Moon-Saturn here is about learning how to be in cooperative and collaborative relationships without being resentful about it. I mean, when there's the Moon, Saturn, which are close, not in the partnership house, and I'll explain why I'm saying this, there you can feel like relationships are obligations, particularly over time. Your Venus, the planet of relationship, is in Aries. Oh, I like things right away, but after a while, the demands and the heaviness comes in.
Stationary.
Right. But the reason I think relationships are so important is the Moon's North Node, a point of growth or integration, is in Libra. And Libra's about building bridges, relating, And yet your south node, the old karmic path, is in Aries, which says, oh, well, screw it. They're not going to understand me, or they're going to be too complicated, or they'll get me for a while, and then they won't get me, so maybe I shouldn't bother. And I'm not saying that you have to stand in and work out every personal and professional relationship you have to perfection, but if you, when you've got that 1 foot out the door, ready to split because you've had enough, unless it's overtly destructive and abusive, I would encourage you to take a breath, hang out for another minute, 5 minutes, 5 days, or 5 years, just to improve your own relationship ability, and then if you need to leave, leave then. I mean, you're a willful person. You're a Taurus.
Strong-minded, bull-headed.
A strong will, Uranus opposite the sun. They don't get me. They're not going to figure out who I am. They're just going to put me in a box here, and I don't like this box. Yet, I think it's also about being clear with other people about what your needs are. The moon is needs on an emotional level, yet fire moons, like Leo, don't like to show need or express it very much. And yet Saturn conjoined the moon says, oh my God, breaking rocks for me, that is the hard work, is the willingness to confront directly, hey, I need this from you, I'm not getting it. You know, that's not easy. But I do think it's the mine in which you can find the great gold of relationships for yourself. Anything else? Well, Uranus is coming up to your Venus. Pleasure, money, relationships.
And harmonizing.
Woo, woo, woo.
And trining Moon and Saturn.
Right.
Yeah, this is a time where change can be very profound and not
exciting.
just change for you, but change in what you want out of life.
Yep.
Kind of like wanting to taste or do new things, but not just, you're not the kind of person, even though there's a part of you that likes the idea of doing something new impulsively, you're not an impulsive person. And so there's this, how do you bring these new things into your life in ways that have that endurance, that longevity, that persistence, which I think is ultimately important for you. And yet if you suppress or hold back what you really need, Jeff addressed that earlier, it's like that then turns into the lightning striking, the attracting yourself to people who aren't what they seem to be, or people who are on the edge because you want to be more on the edge, but you're more contained, and so you might attract yourself to someone who then doesn't come through in the way you expect. And I think here that part of that Uranus moving over Venus, and now I hear myself talking like Jeff would talk rather than how I would talk, because I'm often the cautionary one, and Jeff is the one saying jump. You know, you'll grow wings, and I'm saying, no, ain't no wings, don't jump. But I think here that with Uranus going over your Venus and harmonizing with the Sun and Saturn, that this is a time in your life to experiment, to try, to do the things that you haven't done just for the hell of it, without necessarily knowing where it's going to go or what you're going to do or how it's going to work out.
Yeah, and I think part of the story of this chart is when you finally taste whatever it is, something new and exciting, you may gobble it all up. And, it's almost like feast or famine in a way, experientially, and learning how to sip, learning how to taste without taking it all in, to give yourself a chance to experiment and to try and to take the risk of certain behaviors, and is a safer way to meet the excitement quotient in this chart without going overboard.
One last thing, and that is that we have Jupiter, which is a 12-year cycle, coming around for its second, third time, and lining up with its own place. This is the beginning. Again, it says what I just said earlier, but in a different way. You're at the tail end of an old cycle, and you're at the very, very beginning and haven't quite really moved into it yet, but it's right there of a whole new cycle of opportunity. Where that's going to take you, I don't know, and I don't think you should care. I think you should just take it. Whatever opportunities there are, jump, fly.
Samples.
Things. I like that. Yeah, grazing. Anne?
Yay.
Anne.
Hi, Anne. That's from Santa Clara County? Okay, because we discovered 3 or 4 mountain views.
There are four mountain views in
in
the state of California.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we went with the odds.
Yeah, the big one. All right. Well, there is a close square or right angle between the moon of emotion and feeling up there in dutiful, responsible Capricorn and Mars, the planet of action. Now, the good side of that is that you're probably good at emergencies and in pressure-packed situations. Moons in Capricorn tend to be reliable, yet Mars, this planet of urgency in a right angle to the moon, tends to create an attraction to crises or the ability to handle them well.
And Mars, remember, today just moved into Libra, which one would assume that this should be or could be an action-packed week or two for you with Mars returning to where it was when you were born. But you know, Jeff, it's not just the moon squaring Mars. That moon is closely trine Uranus and closely quincunx Venus and even the sun. There's the sense that the moon really is the focal point or the point in that chart which is most connected to other points. And you're right, there's that sense of the manager, the crisis manager, the person who can handle things, figure out what needs to be done, and then do it. So yeah, I think that Capricorn moon is a really important piece of the chart.
But what's the fun of being competent if you're not loved?
Especially
if you're
for a
not
Leo.
responded to personally. Because that too, I think this is, here's the moon in Capricorn. You even have Taurus, another earth sign rising. That moon in Capricorn aligns favorably with that Taurus rising. People can rely upon you. You appear to be reliable, but it's this green line, a quincunx, an angle of 150 degrees is sort of oil and water, non-mix between, oh, I'm a dutiful moon in Capricorn, but I'm a Venus and Leo goddess who loves me, who thinks I'm great, who's willing to decorate my house with expensive rose petals. You know, there is that potential of sacrificing or giving so much out. What are you getting back on a personal level? That, I think, is an area of challenge for you.
And I think that's it. The two songs, isn't there some Material Girl? What's that? And Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Those are the two pieces of what you just described, that there's this ambition and drive and need to organize and do things right and to climb the mountain and all of that. And yet, at the same time, you're a Leo. You want to have fun. You want to be appreciated. You want to love and be loved and, you know, be like a flower in the summer sun and just kind of take it all in.
Yeah, the south node of your moon is in Capricorn at the top of the chart.
It's like you've
The
worked
most
hard enough.
Yeah, the most responsible place. Where the north node in Cancer in the bottom of the chart says, what about Anne's needs? Well, not Anne's responsibilities, Anne's needs. Usually moon and Capricorns never get to be babies. You know, they start as little adults, or they encounter environments in which mom doesn't respond to them in an
They have to
instinctive
breastfeed
way.
their mom on the first day.
Often, yeah. And yet, the good news, I like to say that Capricorn is intrinsically good at nothing except the mechanism to learn anything they put their mind to. And that for you, it is about, what are your needs? What are your subjective needs? Not rational stuff, but deeply feeling ones. And spending time with that without being self-pitying, but being real emotionally, is a way to sort of to warm you, to moisten you, and to create a space for that kind of emotionalism, which is not so easy here.
And I think with the early Capricorn moon, Pluto having come across that 3 years ago or so, and with Uranus squaring it last spring, and I mean, the changes have been very, very profound. But now as Uranus has moved on in Aries, it's forming a trine with your sun this year. And this is a time, like with Crystal's chart, this is a time when change should come easily. It's those things which you've tried to change, but you couldn't because it would disrupt everything. Now it's time to make those changes. It'll be like falling off a log, easy, and the changes you'll be able to make will be very profound. Do it.
And I think they're about romance, self-expression, creativity. Uranus is in the 5th house of self-expression, creativity, and romance. It's coming to a trine to the sun, which is in Leo, the 5th sign. There's something heartfelt in
Right.
all of this. And maybe it has to do with allowing yourself to be young, allowing yourself to act out your creative, expressive, or erotic side in ways that can maybe feel a little embarrassing or foolish, but giving yourself some room to do that will probably create more joy in your life. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Jeff.
And
Thanks, Craig and Lily, again. Thank you, Mom. Thank
and
you,
we'll be
Dad.
back the first Wednesday of next month.
Unless
or
it's a holiday.
unless it's a holiday. Or Rick will be back here tomorrow and every other day. So just, he'll do mini readings all week.
Right.
Let's go blow stuff up. Okay, so we'll plan it post Thursday or Friday.
Do you have a business card or website?
Yes.